Hi, welcome to the second in 5 modules regarding health and safety committees for the province of Alberta. As I've mentioned before, this set of modules, this entire course, meets the legislative requirements for health and safety committees for training for the province of Alberta as far as the health and safety legislation goes. So why don't we, without any further ado, talk about what we're going to cover in this one. And so in this module, I'm going to talk about what are the obligations of worksite parties of the province of Alberta and why health and safety committees need to know. So your learning objectives here, once you're finished and answer the questions on the learner platform, or if you're watching on YouTube, by the time you're done, you'll understand why it's important to understand the obligations of worksite parties. You'll also understand the obligations around the 5 main worksite parties: employers, supervisors, workers, service providers, and multiple obligations. Now, there are a total of 10 different worksite parties that are described in the legislation along with their obligations. And I encourage you, if you have a complex worksite, have a look at the link in the description of the YouTube video or the link in the course narrative so that you can better understand. But I'll just leave you with that. And we're going to talk about the 5 main worksite parties in this module. Also, what the different obligations mean to a health and safety committee, as well as how the safety committee involvement with the different worksite parties helps to enhance a safety culture. Now, keep in mind one other thing. I don't mind you watching the video. I don't mind if when it comes time to do the quiz, if you open the YouTube channel and watch the video at the same time. Don't have a problem. My whole entire desire is that you gain the knowledge so you're a well-functioning health and safety committee member. That's it. Let's understand the obligations of worksite parties and why it's important to understand them. Knowledge of the obligations of worksite parties helps to ensure that all parties are aware of their responsibilities, and as the Health and Safety Committee, you can help raise that awareness if you're aware of the obligations of different worksite parties. It promotes accountability and compliance with health and safety legislation. Although ignorance is no defense of being in non-compliance of the legislation, having a good awareness of what you have to do to be compliant certainly helps in being compliant. It also helps prevent accidents and injuries and legal issues in the workplace because you're aware of what your compliance requirements are. And the Health and Safety Committee, if need be, can make recommendations to the employer if obligations aren't being met. Let's talk about the first of the main worksite parties, and that's an employer. Okay, this definition is right from the Act. It's and we'll go over the top 4. A person who is self-employed in an occupation. They're an employer. A person who employs or engages one or more workers, including a person who employs or engages workers from a temporary staffing agency. They're also a person designated by the employer as the employer's representative, or a director or officer of a corporation, or a person employed by the employer who oversees the occupational health and safety of the workers employed by the corporation or the employer. Essentially, what does all this mean? Basically, employer is an entity or a person employing or paying someone or engaging, such as in the case of a volunteer or intern, someone to perform duties and tasks that benefit the employer. Let's look at the obligations, and starting with the 5 main worksite parties for employers. So, employers are responsible for providing a safe work environment, but also being safe is also free of harassment and violence. They have to ensure that they've done a hazard assessment and identified all hazards before work begins. They also have to ensure that all workers are properly trained to perform their tasks correctly and in a healthy and safe manner. They also have to ensure that workers are aware of their rights. They also have to ensure that supervisors supervising their workers are competent to do so. Notice it doesn't say qualified or certified. It's competent. And there's a difference. Part of that competency is also the supervisors have to be aware of the legislation, but I'll talk about a bit more about that in a bit. Employers also have to provide the necessary resources to perform work safely, including ensuring that there's a health and safety committee in place along with the terms of reference, and that all of the workers at the worksite have access to the legislation, whether it be those blueprinted books or ability to access it on a computer. They also have to ensure that the workers are competent regarding the work that they do, including work that may possibly endanger them. They have to make sure that those workers are trained in such a way that they can mitigate all the hazards and perform those tasks safely. They also have to ensure the availability of the hazard assessment and the control information. So, as I said before, employers are required to identify and assess hazards in the workplace. They also have to include workers, but they also have to make sure that all of that information is available to the workers. They have to cooperate with anyone exercising their duties under the legislation. You're going to see that as a common thread throughout this, is there have to be cooperating with anyone exercising their duties under the legislation. You're going to see it with all the worksite parties. Just a quick hint. Spoiler alert, the next thing, what is a supervisor? A supervisor means a person who has charge of a worksite or authority over a worker. Now, keep this in mind, okay? A supervisor is a role, not a title. If you're assigning workers their tasks and monitoring their performance and directing them while they're working, you are a supervisor, regardless of what you're being called at work or what the name on the door or what your business card says. You're a supervisor. Once again, not a title, a role. Let's talk about the obligations for supervisors. They inherit a lot of their obligations from the employer. The employer has a big umbrella over the whole entire organization, whereas the supervisor has a smaller one under their area of authority and over the persons in their authority. They have to protect the health and safety of the workers under their authority and, of course, everybody in the vicinity of the work taking place. They also have to ensure that workers comply with the legislation. So that's that part about being supervisors being competent. They have to ensure that workers follow safe work procedures and are also not participating in harassment or violence, and they're not allowing any harassment or violence around their workers. They also, and you guessed it, they have to cooperate with anyone exercising their duties under the legislation. As I said, you're going to hear a common theme. The next thing is workers. What is a worker? A worker means a person engaged in an occupation, including a person who performs or supplies services for no monetary compensation for an organization or employer. So, essentially, you're performing tasks that benefit the employer. There are some exclusions there, and I'll give you an example. A student in a learning activity conducted by or within an educational institution for which no compensation is paid to the student. Now, as I said before, there are other examples that are there are other points in the legislation that you need to know about. I talked about the main ones here. So there's going to be links in the description of the YouTube video that I encourage you to look up so that you know what a worker isn't. And if you're doing this on the Learner platform, have a look at the links in the course narrative so that you're quite aware of the legislation around workers and what doesn't constitute a worker. As far as workers go, they have to adhere to the legislation and protect the health and safety of themselves and others in the vicinity of the work. So if you're that worker cutting concrete and your dust is affecting others around you, you're responsible to mitigate that, or let your supervisor know that you need additional controls. You have to follow all safe work procedures and not engage in harassment or violence. You also have to report hazards and use any protective equipment, whether it be PPE or other protective engineering controls. Now, the note of reporting hazards, if you see harassment or violence taking place, it's up to you as a worker to report that harassment or violence. And, of course, you have to cooperate with anyone exercising their duties under the legislation. So that's why employers have to cooperate with the Health and Safety Committee, because they also have to cooperate with anyone exercising their duties under the legislation. And Health and Safety Committees have duties under the legislation, which I'll be covering in another module. But I have a question first. What have you done to make your workplace safer this week? Okay, if you're on the YouTube channel watching this, let me know in the comments. If you're taking this on the Learner platform, I want to hear from you. Use the contact information and reach out to me. Now, let's talk about the next one, the person who's not the employer, not the supervisor, not the worker, but a service provider. Now, this means a person who provides training or an entity, consultation, testing, or program development or other services in respect of any occupation at the work site. Typically, this person or entity was and is still often called a contractor, basically someone engaged by the parent organization but not employed by the organization to perform tasks for the organization. Think of someone your company hired to do something. Say, in the instance of many organizations I've worked for, they are hired to manage all of the HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. That group of people was called a service provider. Or you have a company that performs that function of the janitorial work. Okay? Once again, a service provider. Not to be confused with this one, a contracting employer. The definition means a person, partnership, or group of persons who, through a contract or agreement or ownership, directs the activities of one or more employers involved in work at the work site. So just as those things I described earlier, like HVAC, janitorial, that might be an entity that you hire to manage all of those contractors as well. There, see, I'm using it. Manage all those service providers. But either way, we're going to look at the obligations of service providers. They're obligated to comply with all of the legislation, of course, but also with the workplace safety standards. They're coming into your workplace. You want to make sure, and it's part of your duty as employers to make sure that they are meeting at a minimum your health and safety management system standards. They also have to inform all concerned parties of hazards. In other words, let's say that the janitorial group that's mopping the floor, it's up to them to put out wet floor signs, informing all parties of hazards. They also have to ensure that nobody in the vicinity of the work is in danger from the activities of their work or of the byproduct of their work. They also, once again, have to cooperate with anyone exercising their duties under the legislation. Now, incidentally, all of those people working within the organization, it'll be a separate employer, it'll be a separate supervisors that you may be dealing with, and of course the workers of the service provider. All of that seems rather confusing. So this to say that there is such a thing as multiple obligations. In certain scenarios, an individual may fulfill more than one role and must comply with all the relevant obligations. So an example might be a manager who does their manager job but supervises workers sometimes also has to do the same work as the workers they're managing. Or, as I mentioned, one of the other entities, a contracting employer, also may be directing other groups providing services, but also doing the work him or herself. Now, I've reviewed the most common worksite parties, but I encourage everyone taking this course in this particular module. If your worksite is complex, check out the link in the description or the narrative so that you can make yourself familiar and understand more about the different worksite parties. It's imperative as a health and safety committee you're quite aware of all of the different functions. So, what does all of this mean to you as a health and safety committee? Health and safety committees have to understand the specific duties of each party to effectively monitor and, if need be, make recommendations for correction. You're going to see that as a common theme. One of your biggest jobs and one that you're obligated to do by the legislation as a health and safety committee is to receive concerns from worksite parties or from the employees and workers in your organization and then bring it to the committee's attention and make recommendations for correction. Okay. Also, what you do is you act as a bridge between management and workers. Seeing things from two different perspectives helps to facilitate communication and addressing concerns, especially when different worksite parties aren't fulfilling their obligations. Essentially, as I've said before, it's an ambassadorial role. You're an ambassador for safety, somewhat like caretakers of your health and safety management system and its programs. I can't emphasize it enough. You as a health and safety committee are extremely important. And when you're functioning properly, you enhance a safety culture. So let's talk about that right now. Let's talk about how knowing the worksite party obligations and doing your job as a health and safety committee, how it enhances the safety culture. Interaction between the health and safety committee and different worksite parties helps to build trust and openness. Okay, addressing different worksite parties at their level helps to create this atmosphere of trust. And when you're doing that, it builds a safety culture. Health and safety committees' involvement also helps to prevent stagnation. It helps to prevent stagnation of worksite procedures, safety procedures, and even health and safety policies so that different worksite parties are able to meet their obligations. These collaborative efforts and this collaborative approach leads to good workplace safety. You and the safety culture. You're pivotal in fostering a good, healthy and robust safety culture and sustaining it. I've seen health and safety committees get it to a good place and then all of a sudden sit back and not do anything. And the safety culture wanes as a result. So keeping that constant momentum. Health and safety committees act as role models, promoting safe practices and demonstrating the importance of safety in everyday operations, especially while they're communicating with the different worksite parties. And then having those regular meetings, those proactive initiatives, running the safety campaigns, and being a visible part and an active participant in the health and safety functions of the workplace helps the organization to maintain a focus on safety. And the safety committee then reinforces safety as a significant value and a core workplace value. Those of you that are watching this on on YouTube, the next segment you're going to see is going to be on the roles and responsibilities and duties of a health and safety committee. For those of you that are on the Learner platform, you're going to have a short 5-question quiz, and then you'll be able to move on to roles, responsibilities, and duties of a health and safety committee. On YouTube, if you want to watch it, you can check it out right here, right now. Now, until I see you again, I want to just hear that you're being that safety leader. You're promoting safety in the workplace. You're doing the right thing at the right time, in the right place, regardless of who's watching. Okay? Take care. Bye for now.